All right, welcome back. Here we are, episode 3. Today, I want to tell you about how I'm going to tell you a story about how our reactions as fathers could have very long standing effects on our children. Um, Sometimes we have to remember that children don't only remember what happened, but they can build beliefs around what happened. So, with that being said, you ready? Well, let's go. You weren't given your children by accident. God chose you, specifically you, to be their father. Welcome to the Daddy Up Podcast. All right, so welcome back. I'm your host, Jason Jones, a husband, a father of 4, and this is the #1 podcast for fathers who know something is standing between them and the connection they want with their children. I'm going to help you uncover the patterns, anger, addiction, and the wounds that you've carried into fatherhood. See them, confront them, break them, and become the father you were always intended to be. Because your children should inherit your wisdom and not your wounds. Welcome to the Daddy Up Podcast. All right, so let's go ahead and get into this. Like I said, I'm going to tell you a story today about how our actions as fathers can stay with our children for a very long time. Something that seems maybe small and insignificant to us or not, maybe big to us as well, can be huge to our children, and they can carry them well into their lives. So I'm going to tell you right now, I got my box of tissues here, right? Because I'm going to tell you a story about when I was about 6 years old, and something I'm assuming 6. It's a story that has stayed with me for a very long time, but it's stayed with me in different ways. So I'm going to go through the story. I'm going to tell you about it. So let's get into it. Let me get my notes together here. So I'm going to take you back to about 1985, 86, 87, somewhere around there, right? And I'm a little kid. I'm at home, and I'm doing what 6-year-olds do. Now I don't remember the exact circumstance around what exactly happened, but I can tell you this: I did something that got my father hot. And again, I don't remember exactly what it was, but I did something that really upset him. And I just the earliest part of the story that I can remember is being chased through the house. Not chased like in a playful manner, not chased like, oh, I'm going to get you and we're going to have some fun. No, it was nothing like that. I was running for my life. And I remember in from what I can, bring back from the memory, I remember just running through the house and running from room to room, trying to get away from my dad, who had this anger and this demeanor where he was going to hurt me. He was really going to put a beating on me, because that's what my life was up until that point. You mess up, you get beat, and that's just what it was. And I could tell by the way he was chasing me, the way he was screaming top of his lungs, the feeling in the house. This was about to be a bad beating, and I didn't want to just stand there and take it, so I ran. And I remember running through the living room, into the kitchen, and then eventually into the laundry room. Now, where I felt like I made a mistake maybe was I ran into the laundry room, which had one way in, one way out. And I remember getting in there and thinking to myself, now this, I actually remember the thought process of being in there and thinking to myself, oh no, I'm trapped. I got nowhere to go. He's about to get me. And I remember standing next to the dryer, and I was kind of like crouched down, like didn't know what to do. I was confused. I was terrified. I was paralyzed by the fear. And for whatever reason, my dad stopped in the doorway. Now, like I said, there's one way in and there's one way out of this laundry room. So there's nowhere for me to go. There's a back door of the laundry room, but that's sealed off, right? Like we've put foam insulation in there. That door doesn't open for whatever reason. Like I said, my dad sealed the door off. It doesn't open. I can't get out that way. There's a garage door, but the garage door is right next to the doorway that my father is standing in. And I remember thinking to myself, just sitting there like, oh my God, he's going to get me. Where am I supposed to go? What am I supposed to do? I'm terrified, right? I'm about 6, 7 years old. I'm terrified. And he just stood in the doorway and screamed at the top of his lungs to get out of his sight, just over and over and over again. Get out of my sight. Get out of my sight. Get out of my sight. And I didn't know what to do. I was terrified. And I sat there confused. Like, what do I do? Do I make a run for it? Do I try to get past him? Because if I do, he's gonna get me. Do I try to get into the garage? Like, no, I can't do that because again, he's gonna get me. And so I was just again paralyzed by the fear, didn't know what to do, confused, and I don't know what stopped him. I don't know what stopped him. Maybe it was my mom pleading for my life. Maybe he had some sort of, I don't know, just forgiveness, whatever it was. He stopped screaming, telling me to get out of his sight, and he turned around and he walked away. And I remember thinking to myself, like, man, like, where did that stay of execution come from? Like how did I get out of this one? Because I was about to get tore up bad. And I was just confused, right? Now, that's the story, right? I got chased around the house and I was terrified. Now, let me tell you about the effects of that story and how it ties in to me later on down the years becoming a father. So I remembered that story for a very long time, right? And I remember I used to tell the story throughout my life, like teenage years, my 20s. There's been a few times when I told the story, but I always told it from like a comedic point of view. I always used to tell people like, yeah, one day my dad, like, you sit around and you're with people and you kind of compare war stories of parents, right? Like things that your parents put you through, things that their parents put them through. And I remember telling the story and always saying like, man, let me tell you, man, my dad was chasing me through the house and man, my dumb ass, I ran into a room that I couldn't get out of. And he's screaming at me to get out of his sight. And I'm sitting there thinking to myself like, well, where do I go? Do I try to run by you? Like, And again, I told it from a very comedic point of view. And every time I told the story, I got laughs, right? Because people were like, oh man, that's pretty bad. You're stupid, whatever, And I think the laughs that I got helped me kind of normalize that situation. But it wasn't until maybe about a year or two ago when I remembered that story. And I wasn't telling it, it just popped into my head one day. And I didn't remember it from the comedic point of view. This time I was processing it from a traumatic point of view. And I realized like, I was terrified and I was paralyzed. And the thing that I think caught me up the most was that even in all my fear and all my terror and all my confusion, when my dad was screaming to get out of his sight and I didn't know what to do, I wanted to obey him, which is why I was thinking like, do I go here? Do I go there? Like I wanted to still obey him. Now this is a man who's trying to tear me up, who's trying to really like, I felt like hurt me bad. And there was still the urge to follow his instructions, to follow his directions and to obey him. And it for whatever reason in that moment when I was processing it from that traumatic point of view, it just stopped being funny. And I started realizing that, let me say this, because I don't want to paint my father in a terrible light. My father had some issues. He was a good man who provided for his family, but he had some demons that he wasn't able to, I guess, conquer when I was a kid. And like I said, he was a good man. He was a scary person to look at. He had a demeanor about himself where he's like, like just society itself didn't want to test him. He was one of those guys that just had that edge about him. He had that look about him. And my father could protect us from the world, but he couldn't protect us, his family, from himself. There were times when, I would get awakened by my mom in the middle of the night and she would rush me and my sister out the house because she thought that he was going to kill her. She had to like get her kids and protect them. There were times when we spent the night in the car, behind a store, or I remember for whatever reason being like next to a dumpster somewhere in a car overnight, and that happened plenty of times. There were weeks when we would spend the night at her friend's house because they were, taking us in, trying to help us. And this is just what life was, right? This is it seemed normal to me. And again, as I'm processing this and I'm going through it, I'm realizing like everything that I went through to the defense mechanisms that I created to normalize that experience and my total experience as a child. And I realized that I carried that into my fatherhood. Um, I say all those things about my dad to say that I viewed him at a certain point in life for a very long stretch. I viewed him at times as a monster because he was a hard man to live with and he was a hard man to be raised by. And I viewed him as a monster. And there was a day when I lost my control and I lost my temper on my kids. And the same exact fear that I had in my eyes towards my dad was the same exact fear that I recognized in them. And that's when I started to see the patterns, and how those things follow you, and the trauma that you deal with as a child can stay with you for 40 some years. So there were some things that moment taught me. Parents often evaluate themselves by intention, but children experience us through impact. Now, that day, my father may have just been overwhelmed, right? He may have been dealing with something that happened at work or something that happened out while he was, just, in the world. And he couldn't take his frustration out in that situation. If his boss said something out the side of his mouth or something slick, he can't scream at his boss. He can't chase his boss through a house because then he loses his job and he doesn't have the ability to provide for his family. So he comes home and he takes it out on the people that he knows can't do anything about it. He may have never intended to create a memory that was going to last for years, but he did. His intention, whether it was to teach me a lesson, whether it was to hold me accountable for whatever I did, his intention did not stop that little boy from being terrified. And I feel like a lot of times as parents, we evaluate ourselves by our intention. And we say, well, this is what I meant, and this is what I was trying to do, and this is the point of it all. But children don't know anything about intention. And if you justify your reactions and the negative things that you do by your intention, your children will not. They will not understand what your intention is. They just know what the experience was. They just know being chased through the house and being standing there terrified and having fear and being told, get out of my sight, and confused that they didn't know what to do. So we have to make sure that we're not evaluating ourselves by intention, that we're genuinely evaluating ourselves by our actions. And how do those actions translate to the children? So that was what that moment taught me. It also taught me that 5 minutes, right? It may not even have been 5 minutes, can last for 40 years, right? Something as simple as, I don't want to say simple because it wasn't simple, but something to my father, right? Something that he may have forgot, I never did. It stayed with me for a very long time. And a moment can feel small inside of a parent's long-lived life, but to a child, it becomes a reference point. It becomes something that they go back to all the time as they're continuing their life. It becomes a traumatic memory, something that they have to deal with, something that they have to process. And again, for a parent, it could be something that they just forget. They don't even realize. So that's one thing that we have to make sure that we're being aware of as we're parenting and as we're raising these children. Something that may seem small and insignificant to us or maybe be able to be justified through intention is not. It's not small. It's not insignificant, and it cannot be justified through intention. So that's a point that I want to make here. Now, I do want to make sure that I make it clear that not every mistake that you make as a father or as a parent is going to traumatize your child, right? Like I said in the previous episode, you are going to make mistakes. It's going to happen inevitably. You are human, you are going to make mistakes. And not every mistake is going to traumatize your child, but there will be some. Now, the danger and where the trauma comes in is the repeated aggression, I guess you can say, right? It's the repeated fear, the humiliation, the unpredictability. All of those things repeated over and over and over and over and over again can quickly become part of how a child understands relationships. And if that's how they understand relationships, that's how they're going to act in their relationships when they get older. Now, everyday fatherhood examples, some could be like screaming in the car, right? Your kids are driving you crazy in the car, you're screaming at them. Or, that look that you give them across the dinner table, slamming the door when you get frustrated, hard enough where the walls shake. All of those things repeated over a long period of time can have long lasting effects on your children. Because again, they start to think that it's just a lot of confusion. They start to think that my dad is always mad, or he's always mean, or something's wrong with him. Did I do something wrong? There's just so much confusion that we should not be making our child endure. So we have to make sure that we're watching those actions, that we're watching our anger, that we're watching our temper. Because if not, again, a moment that lasts a second can carry on with a child for 40 years, if not longer. Now, like I said, there was the fear that I had in my eyes when I was being chased through that house is the same fear that I recognized in my children. When I became a parent, one of the things that I realized is that I wasn't just raising my children. Parts of my childhood were helping me raise them too. And what I mean by that is that story of being chased through the house, of seeing my dad mad all the time, of seeing him upset, of being beaten left and right, of being pulled out of the house at 3:00 in the morning because my mom feared for her life. All of those parts of my childhood were raising my children as well, because they became part of my personality. They became the way that I handled trauma, the way that I handled pressure, the way that I handled anger and temper and being upset. All of those things played a part in the father that I became. And that's something that I want to make sure that we keep at the forefront. Because again, it's about patterns, right? We have to see these patterns. We have to uncover them if we're going to understand how we become better fathers. And then once we see them, once we uncover them, again, we have to confront them head on. We got to look deep. We got to keep digging and say, well, where did this come from? It's easy to sit there and justify our actions as our personality, right? Because sometimes patterns feel like personality until you examine them. Right? Sometimes the intensity of your reaction belongs partly to an older story. We say that's just how I am, or, I've always had a temper, or I don't tolerate disrespect. That's how I was raised. My dad was worse. We say all those things, but they really don't matter. Because the truth of the matter is that it's about a pattern that is constantly repeating itself. And when we say those things, when we say, my dad did worse, that's just how I am, and, all of those different excuses, what we're doing is we're excusing the pattern. We're normalizing the pattern, and we're not uncovering it. We're not confronting it. We're not breaking it. And that's what this podcast is about. It's about finding out what the reason is for the way that we're acting. Why do I have this anger? Why do I have this temper? What is going on? What did I go through when I was younger? What pattern was created inside of me where I feel like this is normal, that this is justified? So again, that's something that I want to make sure that we keep at the forefront here. Now, we talk about that little boy, right? Because we all have that little boy inside of us. We all have that little kid inside of us. And for me, that little boy ran my house for a while because he was scared. He was fearful. And everything that he went through as a child translated into me being a parent. So it's easy to say like that little boy ran my household, but I can't pretend him. I can't heal him by pretending that he never existed, right? Like I have to understand that trauma that I went through as a child, that trauma that I dealt with, and not just a story about my dad chasing me through the house. That's just to paint the picture, but everything, all of the trauma, right? Every time I got yelled at, every time that I felt like, or that I got beat, or that I felt like I was misunderstood, or whatever it was, every type of reaction that was extremely aggressive and didn't teach me a lesson created that little boy who eventually started to run my house, and started to dictate the way that I parented. And I had to understand that he exists. And if I pretend like he didn't, if I pretend like this is all just part of who I am, like it's just my personality or whatever, then I'm not giving that little boy the healing that he needs. And we have to make sure that we're doing that. Again, see the pattern, recognize the pattern, break it. Now, I understand my father a lot better now that I'm a father, right? That I'm on the other side, and that I can see what he was dealing with. A lot of times as a father, the pressure gets so hard that you got a lot of things that you're dealing with as a father that you're trying to overcome, that you're trying to just internalize and swallow and deal with. It may be career wise, it may be relationship wise, it may be like I said, you don't have a connection with your child. Maybe there's something going on in the marriage, or maybe there's a lot of loneliness, there's depression, there's mistakes that you're making. There's so many things as a father that we deal with that we don't talk to anyone about, because we were taught just swallow it. A man doesn't talk, a man swallows, a man deals with it, a man finds a way. But I'm telling you, if you don't find a way to release it, it will find a way on its own. When my father came home that day and I did whatever I did and he chased me around that house, he wasn't chasing me for what I did. He was chasing me because everything that he swallowed up until that point, everything that he swallowed was releasing itself. He found a way to let it go. Wasn't healthy, but it was what he chose to do. So I understand him a lot more. Now, like I said, my father was not a bad man. He had some demons that he had to battle, that he had to go through because of the way that he was raised. Because the man that raised him, I'm sure, had some battles and had some demons that he had to deal with as well from the way that he was raised. It's a cycle that keeps on repeating itself over and over and over again. And the further back you go, the further back in time that we travel, the harder it was. When we go back and we look at what our great-grandfathers had to deal with from our great-great-grandfathers, there was no mental health. There was no, be easy on your son. It wasn't like that. No. Things were rough. And every generation gets a little bit easier because every man, I think, at a certain point understands that he doesn't want to be his father. He's going to do it a different way. But we still find a way where we show traits of what they gave us, of what they instilled in us, and the trauma that they created in us. Now, again, it's not as bad because, like I said, we make excuses like, well, my dad was worse. And I'm sure my dad will sit there and tell you all day long that his dad was worse. And I'm sure that my grandfather will sit there and tell you all day long his dad was worse. And it's a line that just keeps on going back. But at some point, like I said, we have to break these patterns. We have to do a better job. So again, I understand him. I see pressures now. I see wounds. I understand the circumstances that I could not see as a child. So I get where he was at. It doesn't excuse him. Doesn't make it any less traumatic for me, but now I can see it from the other side. And here's where I was talking about intentions. Because even though that I can see it from the other side, it doesn't mean that it makes it, or it doesn't make it any easier for me. Right? Like I can look and I can say, okay, well, his intention was to do this, but it doesn't erase being chased through that house. It doesn't erase being ran into a room and standing there with nowhere to go, feeling like I was about to get my head knocked off. It doesn't erase me being yelled at the top of his lungs to get out of his sight and me being so confused on where to go. That trauma is here. It ain't going nowhere. And I can process and I can do as many things as I need to heal and to let it go, but it's always going to be a part of my story. So even though I understand his intentions now, I understand what he was going through, I understand the pressures that he was dealing with because I'm on the other side of him, it doesn't excuse it. But I can still love him. I can still love him and I can understand him more now than I did then. Now, one thing that I do want to make sure that I say is that, and I talk a lot about perfection as a father and how it's a myth. It's an absolute myth. But I feel like sometimes the mistakes that we make, we feel like there's no coming back from. Like there's no repair. Like there's nothing that I can do. I made the mistake. Now I just got to live with the shame and the embarrassment and the guilt of it all. but you don't, because repair matters more than perfection. You have to repair these situations. You have to make amends. You have to figure out a way to hold yourself accountable. And I can tell you this, that you cannot go back and stop the moment from happening. You can't, right? But you can stop forcing your child to carry it alone. You can go and you can apologize. And you can say, you didn't do anything wrong. I messed up. I screwed up this one. This one is on me. And I'm sorry that I had to put you through it. I'm sorry I had to give you the trauma. My dad's not alive anymore, so I don't get that apology, right? I wish he could be sitting right here and I could tell him about those things, and I could get it off my chest, but I got to carry this one because I don't get no apology. And that's just what life is. At a certain point, it'll be too late because you will be gone. So use the time that you have now to apologize, to go back and say, hey, remember that thing that happened X amount of years ago or whenever it was? Your child may not even remember it, but that doesn't mean that they don't deserve an apology. Find the time to make sure that repair is a priority. That has to be there. Tell them what you're going to do differently, but then prove it with consistency. You can't just come in and apologize and say, I'm sorry for doing this, and then turn around and do the same thing again. You cannot. And I'm gonna give you an example of that. And this is something that I'm gonna expand on in another episode. But the hardest conversation I ever had in my life, hardest conversation I ever had in my life, was when I had to sit my two oldest daughters down and tell them that I was an addict, and tell them that I had made choices that didn't serve them, that I had put their life in danger, that I had put my life in danger, that I had used money that should have gone to them. I had to look them in their eyes, and I had to tell them that I was an addict and that I was sorry. And I promise you, it was the hardest conversation that I've ever had in my life. I told my wife I was going to do it. And again, I'm going to expand on this in another episode so you'll understand the whole story behind it. But I told my wife I was going to do it, and she said, babe, you don't have to. They're not going to understand. You don't need to do this. And I said, no, you don't get it. You don't understand. This has to be done. And one of the reasons that it had to be done was because I needed to create some accountability for myself. And me sitting down and telling my daughters that, me exposing myself and the mistakes that I had made and painting myself as something other than the superhero that they believed me to be, right? For me to take the cape off, to go back in the phone booth and put the Clark Kent outfit back on and not be Superman. It gave me a whole different level of accountability. It gave me a reason to let my addiction go. Because I didn't want to sit my daughters down and tell them I'm an addict and I'm sorry and I'm never going to do this again, and then go back and keep smoking. I couldn't do that. And I say that to tell you that when you apologize and you mean it with everything inside of you, it gives you a different sense of accountability. It makes you not want to make those mistakes again, because you don't want to be viewed as the man who says it but then can't follow through, who can't be consistent. So again, I say repair as much as you possibly can. Now, I don't want to make this just a story about what I went through as a kid, because this is a teaching podcast, and I want to teach you. I want to give you some practical skills, some practical lessons that you can do, some things that you can hold on to that will potentially help you when you start to see those patterns showing up in your life, right? When they're starting to rise. So one thing that you can do when that anger starts to get up and that pressure starts to build, and you can feel that tightness in your chest, you can feel yourself about to lose it. Recognize the physical signal. That's number one, right? If your chest is tightening, if your jaw is clenching, your voice is rising, you get hot, you're pacing. Recognize the physical signal, because that's the step number one. That's the first warning sign that you get that you're about to go off the deep end. And if you can recognize it and you can redirect it before it starts, if you can regulate yourself before it starts, you have that much better of a chance of not going off the deep end and not giving them a traumatic memory that can last for 40 years. Number two is stop trying to teach, right? Because once you are dysregulated, once you're out of control, once your anger is top notch and your temper is gone, you're not teaching anything anymore. So you may think to yourself like, oh, I had to teach you a lesson in this. There has to be accountability. I got to teach you why we don't do this. But once you're upset and you're dysregulated, they're not getting it anyway because you're not calm. You're not teaching. At that point, you're just yelling with a purpose. And that doesn't help anyone with anything. So make sure that you stop trying to teach once you're dysregulated. Number three, create some space, right? Create some space between you and whatever the issue is, all right? Tell yourself, I'm angry right now. I'm going to take me a few minutes, and I'll come back to this when I'm ready. And then go off. Go off and give yourself a couple minutes. Take some breaths. Relax. Calm down as much as you possibly can. Because I promise you, if you try to handle it in that dysregulated, that highly emotional state, you're not going to get anywhere. So give yourself some space, all right? And then again, regulate before you go back to correcting. Take a walk. Breathe. Pray. Pray. Because prayer works. So pray. Take some cold water. Splash it on your face, right? Sit down. Do whatever helps you to calm down. Because if you try to handle it, if you try to teach the lesson, if you try to hold them accountable while you're upset, you're going to make it worse. So give yourself the space, right? Regulate yourself before you try to correct. Number 5 is return, right? Come back. Don't use that break that you've given yourself to avoid the issue. Because that's where I used to mess up. I would give myself a break and I would go smoke. And I use smoke as a way to escape. And then I wouldn't come back to it. And that was when, in the rare times when I actually like gave myself the ability to walk away, because most times I would just lose control. But if you go and you give yourself the space, make sure you come back to it. Don't go use whatever you've used to escape before and then not come back to the issue. Because then what happens is you leave it at a place where a child knows that something is coming, but you don't ever come back to give it. And now they're walking on eggshells all day because they don't know what dad they're about to get. Is dad going to come back and yell at me? Is he going to come back and be upset? Am I going to get this? Like what's going to happen? And there's confusion. And we cannot make our children endure that confusion. We have to keep things clear and concise, and we have to explain to them what's going on. So make sure you come back after you've given yourself the space. Now, correct the behavior, right? When you come back and you correct that behavior, or when you come back, make sure you correct the behavior, but not your child's identity, right? It has to be along the lines of like, hey, listen, this choice, whatever you decided to do, was unacceptable. We don't do that in this family, okay? It was unacceptable, and we cannot do that. But you can't come back and be along the lines of, what's wrong with you? Why would you do this? Who taught you that? You can't, because now what you're doing is you're disrupting your child's identity, right? What you're doing is you're correcting the identity and not the behavior, and that is more confusion for a child when they have to think to themselves, why did I do this? What is wrong with me? We don't want to give them those questions to have to answer. We don't want we don't want them to have to deal with that. So we got to make sure that when we that we're correcting the behavior and not the identity. That's key. Last one. If you crossed the line, if you didn't do any of those steps before, and you freaked out and you lost your temper and your anger was high, your emotional or your emotions got high, repair. You go back and you apologize. You go back and you say you're sorry. Because like I said, tomorrow is not promised. And at a certain point, you will be gone. And if there's things that you don't apologize for, they will carry your own with your children for a very long time. Like I said, I wish my dad was here and I could have the conversation with him to tell him. And that's not to tear him down, right? It's not to make him feel bad, but it would help me become closer with him. It would allow me to take some things that I'm holding on that he gave me that I shouldn't have to carry on my own and put it back on him and allow him the opportunity to explain and to make amends and to apologize for it. But again, I don't have that opportunity. One of my biggest regrets in life is that my father never got to see me become a father, because I feel like me understanding the other side and seeing how it was on his side now that I'm here, it would have given me a deeper appreciation for him, right? I would have still had to deal with the trauma. We would have been able to work those things out. But I promise you, I feel like we would be best friends right now. And that's the biggest regret of my life, is that I don't have that opportunity with him. So don't do that to yourself. If you cross that line, if you mess up, go back and apologize. Don't hold on to it. Don't hold that shame and that embarrassment and that guilt. Go and release it. The only way to release it is to repair and to make amends and to make sure that you're apologizing for your role and what you've done to create that trauma. So make sure that you're following those steps. And then also understand, you are creating memories right now. Okay? At a certain point down the road, your child may be sitting on someone's couch talking about how bad dad was, or how good dad was. It's really your choice. You are creating memories for your child right now. The same way that everything that you went through as a child, whether it was with your father, your mother, whoever took care of you, whatever you had to deal with as a child, created the memories for you now. And you are in the role of the creator of memories, not the creator, but you are in the role of the person who creates the memories. And you have to honor that. You have to respect that. You have to really understand that role and how important it is to get it right. And again, you're going to make mistakes. But when you make the mistake, go back and apologize. But understand that you are creating someone's childhood right now, right? Like I said, when I got chased through that house and I got ran into that laundry room and I was sitting there terrorized and paralyzed with the fear, my dad didn't realize that he was creating a memory that in 2026, I was going to be sitting down on a podcast talking about. He thought he was just doing what he was supposed to do in that moment and giving me a lesson. He didn't realize how long it was going to be. He didn't realize that he was creating years of trauma that I was going to have to process at some point. So understand the role that you play again in that situation. You're creating memories. If he'd have known better, I'm sure he would have done better. And that's something that we got to make sure that we're starting right now. We have to know better so we can do better. The choice is yours. And healing, just because, we heal, we go through what we go through, we apologize and all those things, right? It doesn't, well, not that it doesn't, but healing can change the inheritance, right? I inherited some things from my dad that I wish I didn't, because it would have made my children's lives a lot easier in the beginning. They had to deal with a father who did not have it together. And I still have some trauma about the things that I put them through. I still have some beliefs that some of the things that I did are that they're not fixable. And I'm not proud of myself for creating trauma in their lives at such a young age. I'm not proud of myself for the way that I acted. I'm not proud of myself for the reactions that I had. But me healing changes the inheritance that they will pick from me, that they will get from me. It changes it because I'm able to heal. I'm able to uncover the patterns. I'm able to see the patterns, to confront them, to break them. And that changes the inheritance that they will receive from me. Me going through my healing, me dealing with everything that I'm dealing with, and you doing the same thing changes things, not just for your children, but for generations of your family going forward. It makes your grandchildren's lives better. It makes your great-grandchildren's lives better. It has far-reaching effects that are going to outlive us more than we could ever imagine. So you have to heal because that inheritance needs to be changed. And I think what I want to close with here, or what I want to say more than anything else, is that God didn't change what happened in that laundry room. Um, but he changes what that laundry room gets to produce. Right? I went through it because I went through it. And again, God can't change it. No matter how much healing I have, no matter how much processing I do, it happened. And it's going to be a memory that I carry with me until the day that I die. But what does change, and where the redemption comes, and where God comes into play, is that it doesn't produce trauma for my children. Not anymore. It produces healing for me, which again changes the inheritance for my children. So again, what happened to me may explain the father that I became, right? It may explain it, but it does not have to dictate the father that my children receive. And that's a key point that I want to make sure that everyone understands. The trauma that you went through, everything that you've had to deal with, everything that you've had to battle through, everything that you've had to overcome throughout your life, right? What happened to you, it explains the father that you became. It gives a story to it. It gives definition to it. It creates the story, right? But it does not have to dictate the father that your children receive. Just because it's the beginning doesn't mean it has to be the end. Just because a story starts one way doesn't mean it has to end that way. So keep that in mind. We all have a story. We've all been through it. We've all had trauma and challenges and hurdles that had to be cleared. But that doesn't mean that those hurdles get to dictate who we are as we go forward. And I think those are the points that I want to make. The little boy in that laundry room, he didn't have anywhere to go. He was trapped, he was stuck, he was confused, he was fearful, he was paralyzed. All of those things are true, right? And that little boy had nowhere to go. But the man he became does have somewhere to go. And it's a matter of choice. Where do I choose to go? What do I choose to hold on to? What do I choose to let my trauma produce? And I think we all have that choice to make. I can walk towards healing now. I can walk toward God. I can do all those things. I can walk toward accountability. But it's a matter of choice. Do I want to? And I can answer wholeheartedly that I do. And I believe that you want to as well. So again, whatever that trauma is, whatever you've been through, whatever the issue is, does not have to dictate the type of father that you will become. And with that being said, that's a wrap on this episode of the Daddy Up podcast. Remember, our kids don't need perfect fathers. They need fathers who are willing to do the work. So choose wisdom over wounds, protect the kids, and until next time, Daddy Up.